Good evening and welcome to the Burlington Board of Electric Commissioners monthly meeting. This generally occurs on the second Wednesday of every month. This meeting is November 10th, 2021. And first up on the agenda is the agenda itself. Are there any corrections or modifications to the agenda itself?
No, it looks great.
Yeah.
Great. Hearing none, we'll move on. Thank you, folks. And the next agenda item are requirements for approvals for 2 sets of minutes. This is minutes for our monthly meeting, October 13th. And then also we had a special meeting on October 27th to review the audit results. So if the other commissioners have had a chance to look them over, if you've seen any content related edits or changes that need to be called out, please raise them now. Otherwise, if it's just, typo type edits, that's something you can send via email to Lori. But otherwise, anyone see anything in particular related to the October 13th meeting that needs to be addressed substantive wise?
No.
Okay, if someone wants to make a motion to approve them.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Modi,
Aye.
Commissioner Stebbins,
Aye.
Commissioner Whitaker.
Aye.
Thank you.
And same for the minutes of the October 27th meeting. This was focused on the audit review. If you saw any substance related issues that we need to modify, now is a good time to raise it. Hearing nothing, would someone like to make a motion and second?
So moved.
A second?
I'll let Bob take that because I was not at that meeting. So.
Wait a minute. Is this about the 27th meeting?
This is, yes, this is the audit.
I was not there. I was not there.
Right, so there are only 2 of us. We might have to hold off on that one.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll come back to that at the next meeting. And welcome, Commissioner Herendeen.
Yeah,
so next up, we have the public forum. I'm not sure if anyone, I see that Paul Alexander is in the Pine Street location. Not sure if anyone is there or if anyone, Lori, you could tell us if anyone is here remotely.
There is no one remotely.
Just myself and Emily.
Okay, well, just for anyone who might view this, when it's shown on local access TV, you're always welcome to participate either in person or via Teams meeting. You're also always welcome to reach out to any of the commissioners. And also we do have Mike Kanarick's customer care team that's always ready to pick up the phone and answer any questions or concerns you have as well. So next up on the agenda is the Commissioner Corner. This is an opportunity for commissioners to raise any thoughts or considerations that you may have had since we last met 2 weeks ago for some of us, or the rest of us 4 weeks ago.
Hi, this is Bob. First of all, I seem to have a problem every time of finding the link. I think sometimes they're sent out quite early and then not sent out again close to the meeting time. So I'm suggesting if I'm correct about that, and I'm not sure I am, please consider sending it out again 24 hours before the meeting. Okay, 3 quick points. I asked for 3 favors last meeting I was at, which I guess was the 13th of October. I asked for specific info from 3 people at BED. They all responded, and I want to thank them. That's Chris Burns, Freddie Hall, and Munir Acosti. Everybody answered my questions perfectly. Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
was just going to say, Commissioner Herendeen, that if you have Microsoft open before you get onto the meeting, I often lose the link too, but it pops up a reminder like 5 minutes before the meeting, and it's got the link join, so it should have popped up in a reminder for you.
Okay. I was actually on 5 minutes before the meeting and no.
I'll be happy
So-
to send out an invite again the 24 hours prior. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
I had a couple of quick things. One is, so Jen Green, I'm a e-bike user and enthusiast. And Jen Green invited me to do a podcast about e-bikes and net zero energy, which I did yesterday at BED. Super easy, and a pretty fun experience, I would say, overall. And then one of my questions for maybe you, Darren, I don't know, for staff is like, so related, and we had this little discussion as part of that doing the podcast about some of the bike lane projects which have become a little bit controversial in Burlington. And I don't know if it's appropriate or for Burlington Electric to weigh in on that, given the net zero energy plan and the desire to reduce VMTs and the importance of bike infrastructure. I'm just curious about that. So that's one question. And then the other thing that we talked a little bit about yet last at that special session, but wasn't like the right topic at the right time, was just if you guys could comment a little bit about staffing and any impacts to BED based on sort of this society-wide problem finding, retaining staff. So those are my two questions.
Excellent. Well, first, thank you for joining us for the podcast. And we actually have the first podcast episode focused on the revenue bond is up on the website. And we have an episode with Chair Stebbins that's coming out soon as well, focused in part on the revenue bond and in part on heat pumps and other technologies. I think e-bikes may have gotten a mention in there too. So we're doing a lot of e-bike discussion, which is great. So we're going to have both of those episodes, Commissioner Whitaker, Chair Stebbins, up shortly. And just maybe just a further comment on the podcast. This is something we came up with as just another way to communicate directly with customers and the community. And our hope for the future, and I know Adam Rabin and Jen Green and Mike Kanarick are all working on this, is to be able to highlight customer stories about the energy transition, about moving towards these new technologies and the benefits, the challenges, all the honest discussion about this effort through the podcast. So we're excited about having this new vehicle for communications, and thank you both for joining us for that. On the bike lanes, we definitely, in the net zero roadmap, have a focus on supporting all means of alternative transportation, all modes. And I think as part of our update with Synapse earlier this year, we really tried to make a push publicly about making sure that not only do we continue to support walking, biking, and transit as ways to buy more time from an emission standpoint for the move towards these clean technologies, but also remote work as an option as well, given the impact that it had on vehicle miles traveled in the city. And so we certainly are supportive. We definitely defer from an expertise standpoint to our colleagues at DPW and planning, who are kind of leading the effort in the city on those different bike lane planning projects and infrastructure projects. I know Jen is definitely engaged as well on some of that and does a good job for us in terms of trying to maintain those interdepartmental partnerships. So we're not necessarily the lead voice, but we're certainly trying to be a voice supporting those efforts. And certainly the e-bikes, we want people to be able to use the e-bikes for transportation and for recreation, and having the bike lanes provides that opportunity. So that's one piece. And then on staffing, we definitely have seen impacts at BED and the entire city. It is a very challenging environment to hire. We're seeing that in some of our search processes. I think we saw recently with at least the Burlington Police Department, there was a bonus that was put in place in order to support hiring and retention. I think there are other city departments that may be struggling with hiring for certain positions. We've certainly seen some turnover that's unexpected that we're addressing and posting for positions. We had a packet that went through the city council this past week that made some organizational updates and changes to some key positions that we'll now be posting, one of which is our superintendent of distribution. Jim Leap was formerly in that position. We're going to be posting for it soon, but every time we have a vacancy, we review the position. We see if it's a competitive salary for the marketplace. We see if we need to update any of the job qualifications and requirements. So we did that with that position, and that'll be posted soon. We also have a packet going again this coming week to convert an IT position that's going to be vacant in December from a certain position to a position of greater need organizationally. So we're trying to, as we see resignations and turnover, we're trying to adapt organizationally to the greatest needs. And then we are working with HR to try where we can to make sure that we're offering competitive offers and making the strongest case we can for employment. But I would absolutely say, and I know several folks on the management team who are on the call, particularly Emily and Munir, are all directly grappling with this as well. And we're not unaffected by these challenges. And in some cases, when we lose someone, we're not losing them to an organization locally. We may be losing them to a remote opportunity in another state. And that we're seeing that now, which is not something we dealt with in the past typically.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Other comments or questions for the Commissioner Corner? Okay, hearing none.
I do have one question. I just curious about it because it, and maybe he'll touch on it on his overall thing, but here, but because it just started this. All right, this is a little nervous about this. Facilitating a white accountability group for city employees just seems like a loaded gun to me. Just would like to know more about that.
Sure. So Commissioner Moody, I think you're referring to Emily's update. And I can say that overall, we're working on a racial equity training that's going to happen for the entire city workforce. And in fact, we're in the process of scheduling the first cohort that's going to go through that group. Is going to be mostly folks at BED who have a schedule that's a little more predictable. I believe the shift workers and folks who may have more field responsibilities are going to be in a later cohort. But the first cohort from BED and from other city departments is being scheduled currently for a racial equity training that's going to last, I believe, 16 weeks or so, and is going to include between 16 and 20 hours of training over the course of that period of time. It's going to be facilitated by the city's Office of Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Is something that the mayor, I think, touched on in his State of the City speech back in April, and was a commitment that he had made then that the city is working to advance now. I think as part of that work, and Emily can certainly speak to this if she'd like, Emily's engaged with some other city employees in I believe what's termed an affinity group. So I see Emily on if she wants to offer further comment on that.
Sure, just a little bit by way of background, if helpful, as Darren mentioned, addressing structural racism was a key priority of the mayor. And as part of that initiative, he and HR and the REIB office created opportunities for all city employees, both people who identify as white and people of color, to participate in affinity groups throughout we started about in March 2021, and they'll go for about a year. So there are groups for, as I said, people who identify as white, and then people who identify as people of color. It's a voluntary thing. And essentially we are reading a book about structural racism and white identity, and just discussing a chapter each month. And I'm a volunteer peer facilitator who's just kind of participating in the group in that way.
Okay, thank you. I guess the way it was phrased just seemed like a kind of loaded, yeah, just seemed kind of just stuck out at me. But thank you.
What book are you reading?
Sorry, I had to think for a minute. It's White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you. So next up, we do have the general manager's update.
Okay, I just have a few items because I know we have a longer substantive agenda, so I don't want to take too much of the time up front, but couple key items. Obviously, we're going to hear a little more, I think, from Emily about the audit, but I do want to say that I'm grateful to Emily and the finance team for their work on the audit this year. We obviously went through that process, which is always a major undertaking without a finance director in place. And so Emily and the entire finance team and the broader organization have contributed and had a clean, unmodified opinion that was timely filed. That's a significant accomplishment, and very, very appreciative of that. That's an important outcome for the organization. And I know this is of interest. We did close our applications for the finance director position. We have interviews with candidates scheduled for next week. So we're moving forward with that process. But very big thank you to Emily and the finance team for their work on that. And we'll hear more about that, I know, in a moment. In terms of the major item on our mind going into the December 7th vote is the Net Zero Energy Revenue Bond. Spoken with a number of media outlets that are interested in talking with us about it. We had the podcasts that we mentioned. We've been doing information and outreach through a variety of channels. We visited all the NPAs. We have shared a frequently asked questions and with a list of answers on our website. Please check that out and share it if you see a value with anybody who has questions. I think the key points that we've certainly emphasized in all of these different communications is just making sure that folks understand what the revenue bond is investing in, the fact that it frees up liquidity and capacity to double our customer incentive funding over that period of time where the revenue bond will be in place, that the bond does not affect property taxes, does not affect the city's debt policy, doesn't affect the ability to go out and bond for a new high school when that comes up next year, and is something that actually decreases rate pressure in the near term and puts very minimal upward rate pressure in the long term because we're providing revenues from projects and maturity savings to help with the repayment. So we've certainly been emphasizing those points and we'll continue to do so. We have a page for the revenue bond on our website, as I mentioned, with a variety of resources. The city also has a bond page for the infrastructure bond and the revenue bond. And the other thing I'd mention is we had federal infrastructure legislation that passed, which is great. And our expectation is that and perhaps Chair Stebbins might be able to share something on this more than what I can share. Our expectation is the legislature will have a significant role in allocating some of the funds from that federal bill to the various communities and utilities. And so we're working along with the other distribution utilities on sharing what our needs are relative to the electric grid and relative to other technologies that might be eligible for funding through that bill. So we expect that'll be a topic of conversation during the upcoming session. And lastly, wanted to share that we have a new performance evaluation form that's been put in place, part of a collaborative process. We had really great engagement from both the IBEW and the management team and all of the employees at Burlington Electric. And the new form is really focused on finding our core values and using those as guideposts for evaluating performance. It's a lot easier, more straightforward, more streamlined review process. It includes a structure that starts with an employee self-review and provides kind of more of an opportunity for a two-way discussion. And we've had an HR training for all of the supervisors so that we have consistency across the organization in terms of the form. So I'm appreciative of all the folks who contributed to that process, and it's a good outcome for the organization as well. And we're excited about that approach. And I'll share one last thing that wasn't in the report, but I'm sure you all will appreciate, which is recently we had a member of the line crew step forward and suggest replacing our gas-powered chainsaws with electric models. As the commission knows, we have a net zero energy employee benefit program that provides a limited incentive to all of our employees, whether they're BED customers or not, to take steps in their own life that support net zero goals. And in this case, we had a member of the line crew who had used that benefit to purchase an electric chainsaw to replace a fossil fuel chainsaw, and learned about the technology, brought forward a proposal. Munir and his team reviewed it. I looked at it, and we're going to be funding it partly this year and partly next year. Not a very significant cost relative to our budget. There may be some tier 3 value that we can squeeze from James as a part of this replacement, but I think when we think about the culture of innovation and the support for net zero and the institutionalizing net zero focus that we want to have at BED, this was a great outcome, and we'll certainly highlight more of these as we go forward. But that was one that stood out to me as a great opportunity for our line crew to step forward with electrification. So wanted to share that as well. And that's everything from me.
Great. Are there questions or comments from commissioners, and in particular related to perhaps the narrative update that was shared in this month's packet? If there's anything that you wanted to follow up on that Darren perhaps didn't touch on verbally? Not hearing any.
Yep. No, I'm just saying nothing.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so then thank you, Darren. We'll shift over to Emily with the financial update.
Thank you, Chair Stebbins. If I recall correctly, the FY21 audited financial statements are first on your agenda. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So get my screen here. So in your packet, I included the first 16 or 17 or so pages of the audited financial statements for BED for 2021. I did not include the notes to the financial statements, which carry on for another 40 pages or so, in the interest of saving some paper and reading time for you all. But the audited financials are available in full on the BED website if you care to get into the detail of any of the notes. At this meeting, I was planning to just walk you through the face of the financials, the balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow, and then also cover the financial statements for the EEU custodial fund, which we discussed at the special meeting with KPMG last month. So starting at the top with the balance sheet, I just wanted to highlight a few things here. As you can see from 2021 compared to 2020, our capital assets were reduced by about $742,000. That's mostly due to, where are my notes, fewer capital additions offset by increases in depreciation expense, which makes sense if you think about the way that the pandemic has affected our ability to complete capital projects, which we have discussed in prior meetings. challenges related particularly to supply chain issues and other disruptions from the pandemic. Coming down, cash and cash equivalents was also down for 2021 compared to FY20 by about $1.8 million. Again, I think we've discussed some reasons for that throughout the fiscal year. Increased customer arrearages being a primary contributor, as well as decreased customer contributions for capital projects are the primary drivers there. And then moving down, I was just going to note here in the accounts receivable where we have made adjustments both in FY20 and again in FY21 for the allowance for uncollectible accounts, just to take into account or reflect the fact that our arrearages are at really unprecedented levels, and that the standard process we had for estimating the uncollectible accounts kind of didn't really make sense to use in this context. So that allowance there kind of takes into account both the state of our receivables as well as the funding sources that we know we have secured to help offset those arrearages, including the state arrearage assistance funds as well as the federal ARPA funds we've received from the city for that purpose. Just coming here, just total current assets, kind of taking all of the above into account, we're down $867,000 for 21 compared to 20. And I'm just going to flip down the changes here. In regulatory assets are some deferred depreciations changes, and I wanted to just call your attention or remind you that we did receive approval from the PUC to again in FY21 record a regulatory asset related to non-capitalized labor. This was labor that we had budgeted to spend on capital projects but could not spend on capital projects due to the pandemic. And then total deferred outflows of resources were up 1.1 million compared to 20. Most of this is due to changes in pension and OPEB liabilities and actuarial reports. I'm going to move now to the liability side of the balance sheet.
Emily, can I probe a little bit the arrearages that we're seeing? I mean, there've been various opportunities for Burlingtonians to get help to pay for past due accounts. I mean, I know I've sent out reminders on Front Porch Forum, wondering. I'm assuming you guys have talked about this. What your thoughts are in terms of moving forward? How do we? I mean, we're still in a pandemic. You just said it's so hard to hire people. We also know that a lot of folks have, sort of chosen not to, keep trying to apply for jobs. There are people who are hurting, can't get jobs. Any thoughts on what we could do differently besides, letting people know that there are these grant programs and other opportunities to sort of dig out from wherever they may be in terms of arrearages?
Sure. I mean, I can address that initially, and then Darren may want to add, or Mike Kanarek. We have urged customers to take advantage of the 2 state programs, one which recently ended, one which is continuing. VCAP has recently ended. VRAP for renters is continuing. We have been approved to receive, I believe, over $400,000 from those 2 programs combined since they began this spring. So we are having success in reaching customers there. We also received, as was budgeted, we received $1.3 million to use toward customer arrearages from the city's ARPA funding. And what we've discussed is just in recognition of the fact that the pandemic is still continuing and continuing to affect our customers' economic situations, to continue voluntarily our moratorium on disconnections through the winter season, and then in the sort of end of the winter heading into the spring, begin to message to people that we will be reinstating our disconnection policy and, asking them to take action. And then if they're unable to take action on their arrearages, offering the ARPA funds as a means to help them catch up.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Should I flip back
Yeah,
to the...
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, liabilities. So the top of this really is kind of what's current in terms of current means sort of due in the upcoming fiscal year. So most of these the accounts payable sort of is what it is as of the end of June. And then these bond amounts here are really set by our current maturity schedules for the bonds. So there's some slight changes there, but it's really driven by the repayment schedule, the debt service schedule on the bond. Overall, our current liabilities were up only $200,000 for FY20 compared to FY20. Sorry, for FY21 compared to FY20. Similarly here, and non-current debt, this is sort of the rest of our bond or debt service obligations, again, as determined by the maturity schedules. The biggest increase in this section is right here in the net pension liability. This number comes right off of the city's actuarial report. It's up $2.4 million. That number can swing a lot and often does swing a lot. It's one that we don't have a lot of control over. And so then coming down again here, we can see that total net position for where we ended from a balance sheet perspective for FY21 versus FY20, we had a decrease in net position, but very small, only $43,000. And the most, I could say, the key things sort of driving or keeping that net position relatively steady from year to year was that we had less of an operating loss in FY21, as we'll see when we do the income statement next, an offset or helped by an increase in other income. So that's kind of a preview of what we'll see here on the income statement. Just make this a bit larger for you. Get that over here. Okay. Just give me a moment to flip my pages, please. All right. So starting at the top on the revenue side, we had sales to customers up by $122,000 compared to FY20. Other operating revenues, this is mostly Rex driving this. We're up by almost $260,000, where we saw both an increase in price and volume of Rex sold in FY21. Here's the provision for uncollectible accounts I mentioned on the prior page. Production expense, so this is really generation, was increased by just under $1 million compared to FY20. We spent a little bit more on O&M at McNeil and the gas turbine in FY21, in part because we produced more generation in FY21 than in FY20. Purchase power costs decreased significantly by just over $2 million. We saw reduced capacity prices, which we've discussed before. We saw lower wind contract deliveries, which we've discussed, I know, throughout the fiscal year. And we had some offsets too in terms of specific contracts, particularly Hydro-Quebec having an increase in volume. But net for power supply or purchase power, excuse me, we were down $2 million compared to 20. Transmission costs were up about $146,000 compared to FY20. Distribution was just about in line where we were before. This category, customer accounting, has a lot of different sort of pieces that make it up. It was up overall about $417,000. One of the big drivers of that increase was actually higher tier 3 expense, which is a good thing compared to budget. And A&G, administrative and general, is also a big category with a lot of components. That was up about $350,000. A lot of that due to things that tend to go up every year, like salaries, pension, benefit costs, property insurance. Depreciation and amortization was also up slightly, as were taxes. So we had, you can see here, the operating loss was improved by about $500,000 from FY 2020. And then in non-operating revenue, dividends, these are the dividends associated with our Velco investment. Interest rates are very, very low. So unsurprisingly, we made a lot less in interest income. And then grant income, as you can see, is up quite a lot. And that's because of the grants we were able to access, FEMA reimbursement, the local government emergency relief aid, which was significant. So there are a number of grants that were significantly increased for FY21. So I'm just going to come down here to, where am I going? Oh, here we go. So the decrease in net position, this is what we, when we typically do our financial review each month, talk about in terms of net income or net loss. It appears here as decrease in net position. You can see we had a $43,000 net loss for FY 2021, much improved from FY 20. Obviously, it wasn't where we budgeted to land FY 21, but given the challenges associated with the pandemic, I think it was a as a positive result as we could have hoped for. And so then those changes sort of agree to the net position that was stated on the prior page on the balance sheet. Any questions on this before I go to the cash flow?
Commissioners?
Nope.
All right.
For
cash flow is
tip.
The cash flow is busy, so I won't go through it in very much detail, but as you can see, we had increased net cash from operating, which makes sense what we've been talking about. We used a little more cash for capital and financing, and coming down here, we had we kind of ended the year right with about $2 million less in cash, kind of writ large, compared to FY20, which again, the arrearages, the customer contributions, right? This is just sort of another way of looking at the same inflows and outflows and calculating it in a different way. From here, I was going to go to briefly some statements that are new for FY21. And as you recall from our discussion with KPMG in January 2020, BED became its own fiscal agent for the EEU funds, which previously were administered by another financial firm in the state. And so we became our own fiscal agent, which means we sort of collected the money. We collect the EEU fees ourselves, we put them aside, and then we do EEU projects. We invoice ourselves and then transfer the money spent on the projects from the EEU account to our operating account to reimburse ourselves. We continue to submit the same monthly reports to the state to document and approve our EEU expenditures and account for them. But what that means is that in FY20, we sort of brought the EEU into BED's financial statements, and then this year We were required to adopt a new accounting standard, GASB 84, coincident with the city's adoption of it. And that requires sort of separating out those EEU funds into a separate fiduciary or custodial fund, which really is a more transparent and better way to report it. In theory, someone else could again become the fiscal agent for our EEU activities, and these funds are not really, ours. They belong to our EEU program. So just looking here at the assets for the EEU, about 3.2 million here in cash. That was up slightly from 2020. AR was a little bit up as well. So increased assets, accounts payable were down for timing. So we had decreased liabilities and therefore a slightly increased net position for the EEU on June 30. It's a fairly simple balance sheet, for a relatively limited activity. And then there's a statements of changes in net position, kind of an income statement where we have additions to the fund, right? Collections from customers. This was the transfer in from the prior fiscal agent over here in FY20. We do receive forward capacity market and Regi additions as well. And then here you can see the payments for programs flowing out, payments to BED for administration, total deductions, and you can see the change in net position is relatively small compared to FY20 because FY20 was starting from 0 and then sort of added $3 million sort of came in to start the year for FY20. So again, staying right around the $3 million balance in the EEU fund for 2021. Any questions on anything related to the FY21 audit? All right, I will now, I'll save you from watching me scroll just a moment.
So we're now shifting, just for viewers, we're now shifting to the financial update for FY22 September as compared to the audited financial results for FY21.
Thank you, Chair Stebbins, for the segue. Yes, so here are FY22 month of September results, budget to actual results. So down here. So for the month of September, we had a favorable budget to actual variance, favorable by $333,000. Contributing to that favorable variance were increased sales to customers versus budget, which is a welcome thing. Interestingly, this month, both residential and commercial sales were up by about $400,000. So I think that's welcome and indicative of the sort of more normal operating conditions at the schools in Burlington. Other revenues, this is mostly EEU, were unfavorable by about $50,000. It was not a rec delivery month, so we have no power supply revenues. Power supply expenses were very slightly over budget. Making that up, we had less fuel due to a combination of, I think, a couple maintenance outages at McNeil and also some sort of strategic outages at McNeil to not run now so that we can make sure we have plenty of wood supply for the winter. Operating expenses were over budget by about $211,000. Some of this is purchase power being over budget, which makes sense because we ran McNeil less and therefore needed to buy more power. And some of this is also timing, just of maintenance contracts and tier 3 expenses in particular. Not much to note here. Again, the pilot, the tax is contributing to taxes being under budget for the year. Other income is under budget as well for September. This is mostly, I think, customer contributions not arriving as planned. So year to date, we're fairly on track. Actually, we have a just a $79,000 variance in net income. We're at 2.29 million here. We budgeted to be at 2.372. And then I will head down here to capital spending. We're about 11% total as of Q1. Mostly timing here. Again, some supply chain factors contributing. And then I'll come down to cash and the ratios. Cash is quite a bit under budget for where we had thought we would be at this time. It's just under 7 million. We had budgeted to be around an 11.5. $3 million of that variance is due to the timing of the bond anticipation note, which is sort of how we get our annual $3 million general obligation bond. That ban was issued in early November, so we will see that $3 million in cash for the November financials that we review in December. And some of the other variance in the cash versus budget is the timing of the receipt of the ARPA arrearage money. We received that transfer, but we cannot count it as cash until we actually apply it to customer accounts. So it's kind of held to the side until that time comes. And then just looking at our ratios, the debt service coverage ratio is here at 4.27. Adjusted debt is at 1.09, and then 121 days cash on hand. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from commissioners?
Yes, hi, this is Bob. Early on, Emily, you mentioned that demand for electricity seemed to have more or less gotten back to normal, which you attributed to the schools. And I think this may be the first time you didn't show one of those graphs showing the changes both in commercial and residential and all that. So the question is, did I interpret what you said right? That you think we're back to normal, quote unquote?
Well, not entirely. I think both residential and commercial were up by the same dollar amount. And so when I said the schools, I meant K through 12 schools and the colleges, right, have on-campus populations really for the first time at more at a normal level of population and faculty and staff population, right, than we've seen prior to any point, I think, in the pandemic. And so I think in that respect, yes, I would say that's more like normal. I think the fact that residential was also up so much also sort of speaks to a continuing, not the old normal, right?
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yep. Right.
Other questions from commissioners? I'll be interested to see if we can, hold steady like we have thus far. We'll see. Thanks for your work, Emily. Okay, so next up on the agenda is Paul Alexander presenting BED's 2021 property, and this is the renewal discussion and vote. Do this every year to try and figure out insurance, etc.
Okay, give me a second, make sure you can see my screen here. Let's see. I'll try to pull this up. Can you see that?
Yes.
And is it big enough to read?
More or less.
Excellent. Okay. So I sent you in the package quite a bit of backup information. This is just my talking points. The good news is only 3 slides, but I'll walk you through it. And if you have any questions, I'm more than willing to answer them. So this is our annual. This is the big line of insurance. For those who have served for many years here, you'll notice this line was 3 years ago was 228,000. Now we're in the mid 600,000. So just give you an idea of what we've experienced in the last 3 years. Just generically, what is covered under the property, boiler, machinery? I won't read this verbatim, but it's physical assets. So that's much like covering your home to perils of fire, lightning, smoke, and those kind of things. And it covers all the tangible property, things you can put your hands on. So intangible would be trademark secrets and that kind of stuff, goodwill, etc. So everything from our furniture to computers to everything, pieces of paper that you can put your hands on, that's covered under this policy. Our current status, so we have, and we've had now for 3 years, this line used to be written by one underwriter, one insurance company, if you will. And because of the issues we've faced, not unique just to us, but to biomass plants across the nation, we have a team of 4 carriers, AIG, StarTech, Zurich, and Aegis that write this. This policy expires on 11/20, and we currently pay $644,506. The handouts that you received through Lori, a cover letter from Hickok and Borbin, that's our insurance agent. A property, boiler, machinery, if you will, a history that would reflect 21 years, just so you could see with some Excel graphs. A Hickok and Borbin quota share program, and that's pretty slick. It's not a huge exhibit, but it shows the breakdown between the McNeil and non-McNeil and the different carriers, of the percentages that they're writing and stuff. It's important to understand right now, this is not finalized. So that's why you'll see in this recommendation, it's a not to exceed. We know we're optimistic that we're actually going to go down from the not to exceed, but I'll get to that in a second. And finally, just a cover letter that went out to yourself as elected commissioners, Board of Finance and City Council. That vote will come up next Monday. So what's new this year? Again, our insurance agent, Hickok and Boardman, per normal, in the last 2 years have been brutally painful for them. Worked diligently with those existing 4 carriers, and again, still in negotiation with AIG. I think I've shared many years in a row. The carriers in general will wait to the last minute because a day or 2 or a week in the insurance world, particularly the market that we're in now, can mean a lot of money. So they'll go right up to our 11/20 date as close as they can. We're still in negotiation, that is Hickok and Boardman with AIG, which is a positive sign because AIG, their rate per $100 of coverage is significantly lower than the other carriers. And they currently write 25% of our business, both on the McNeil and the non-McNeil side. So Paul Plunkett, the lead agent, we're in some very positive negotiations with them. It's going to go down to the wire, but they are willing to write 5% more, which is huge for us. We're talking probably from a rough number, $40,000 to $90,000 difference just by swapping that over. So that's good news. Again, the renewal premium is anticipated to increase from last year's amount, which I mentioned before, the $644,506, to a not to exceed $676,755. And that's nothing more than a 5% increase. That's exactly what we budgeted for in our fiscal 22 year budget. So if we come in the worst case scenario at the 676, that's going to match our budget exactly. Again, we're optimistic that we may come in at the existing premium, the 644, or even as yesterday, the agent and I were talking, he thinks we might come in a little bit below that. So that's all very positive. Won't bore you with a lot of insurance stuff, but total insurable value just means how much is the total amount of property that you're trying to cover. For many years in a row, it was whatever we had. Right now, our total insurance is like $264 million. That's capped and has been capped the last several years at $175 million. No real concern because the McNeil station is just barely over that 175 limit. It's at $187 million. And of course, the property side is much lower. That's at $76 million. And it's, again, because those plants are sites are 3.5 miles apart, there's really, if an event takes both those plants down at some time, we'd have bigger issues than insurance. And again, Hickok and Boardman has appealed, if you will, to AIG to increase their capacity by 5%. And in trade-off for that, we're going to most likely raise our deductible. This is just for the boilers themselves. we were at 200,000 years ago. We went to 500,000. Now we're going to move to $1 million. Again, not a big deal and very common in industry standard. And we're getting near the end already. Just some of the things. So what have we done? And you've asked questions, and the Board of Finance and the City Councilors, some of the things that we can do, whether within property or the other lines, to save some money. So since we met a year ago on this topic, we actually eliminated, we've had a professional liability policy that I started in 1994, and knock on wood, we've never used. It's actually for the engineering department. But we joined with the city as their, and these are a lot of acronyms, but directors and officers that protects you right here as commissioners, public officials, and the professional liability coverage is included under travelers under one policy. So we lowered our fiscal year 22 budget by a little over $50,000 by doing that. So that's good. Hickok and Boardman is exploring. We are with the city on workers' comp and auto through travelers. And so they're talking or looking at ways to maybe separate without harming either the city or BD with mutual savings on those lines. In addition, combining with the city, obviously the city has different risks than us. Again, the McNeil station being a generating plant has unique risks, and that's what makes it so expensive. Combining with the city on a property policy to meet what they call minimum premium. For instance, Zurich, which is interested in maybe writing the whole thing, or Chubb, excuse me, has a $750,000 minimum premium. So we're getting close to that. So if we combine with the city, that may be some savings on there. Combining with the city on their cyber liability policy. For the first time ever, again, if you know anything about captives, it's pretty unique. Vermont has been the leader. If you go back to Governor Dean, we're third in the world as far as writing captives, specifically because Vermont's Captive Insurance Association, VCIA, we're third in the world. Yes. Can
I interrupt for a sec?
Yes, please.
The combining with the city on their cyber liability policy, I mean, cybersecurity seems to me, I mean, it's important for the city, clearly, but for an electric utility, I could imagine there are other considerations. Does the cyber liability policy that the city has, is that robust enough for an electric utility?
Great question. So I haven't seen their policy. We got it in the ground floor many years ago. So our cyber is actually significantly low. And that was a huge, quite frankly, number one for utilities across the United States this year. What they were paying, they were seeing enormous rates when they were lucky enough to get a policy. So we are still at that level. I suspect next year that's not going to be the case. And so without seeing their policy, I don't know. But because we share the same agent, I have great confidence that whatever policy, if we do this, and these are just ifs, it would protect both at the same level, if not higher, at a lower price. I mean, we're not going to do it if it's not beneficial to our ratepayers. So,
yeah, I would just say that's a pretty critical piece to ensure that we're keeping that as robust as possible. But
yeah, it's huge. It's unbelievable. Okay. Next to last bullet here, exploring the possibility of joint capital. Like I mentioned, FM Global and Energy Insurance Mutuals have shown some interest, reaching out to our agent to combine, and I won't name them, some fairly big local and state transmission and distribution utilities. So that's an interesting, captives is a very unique field. There are some startup costs and legal issues and that stuff, but it's something in a hard market that we should be looking into, and they're going to do that. And then the last bullet here is just, we have had a host of engineering recommendations through these carriers that wanted to see get done, and really kudos to Darren and Munir and all the staff down in McNeil. The number one thing that it actually got delivered on a Sunday and was being installed at the secondary boiler feed pump down at McNeil, and that had a huge impact on keeping our premiums down or being reduced. So we've knocked off quite a few of those recommendations last year. So finally, the impact on the budget. Again, as you know, we have a fiscal year budget from July to June. This budget, which we create every January, we had budgeted $663,318, and that's a combination of because the line renews on November 20th. It's 5 months at the current premium, and then in 7 months at whatever we project. So again, if we come in at the not to exceed $676,755, it would be a 0% change in our budget. and a 5% increase over the expiring premium of $654,506. So I'll pause there. I know there was a slew of backup information of charts, and I could walk you through that, but I see the time. But answer any questions you don't have. If not, Lori, I believe, put the resolution at the bottom, motion at the very bottom of this.
Commissioners, any questions or comments?
Bob again, deja vu, right? I mean, we kind of gone through this before. I guess we were freaked out the first time, but we don't have any options, really, do we?
No, yeah, Bob, yes, it seems strange to feel comfortable that we're in the range of the mid 600,000s when we were just in the mid 200s just a couple years ago. We'll never see that again in my lifetime, but and Hickok and Morton pointed out all the reasons. There's actually 5 of them typically, and again, when they're negotiating these carriers, but I'll just read you that brief. But it says, due to changes as insurers, continue to fund for losses due to climate change, that's 1. Increase in material costs due to COVID, 2. Related supply chain issues and traditional types of claims experience, and reinsurance costs. So that's when the insurance reaches what they call their stop loss, stop gap, and then they try to peel off or roll off some of their premium to another company, the reinsurers worldwide. So all those things together, it's more than a hard market. It's, we're just doing our best to hang on. And with some of these changes, we're hoping to see levels stay flat, or maybe hopefully even this year go down a little bit, but I don't think we'll be down in the 200,000s. When I first came, we had a 3-year policy at $68,000 a year. So you can see the change in 28 years. Huge.
Yeah, what I meant by my question was you don't need to explain it because we heard that from you previously and we were freaked out at that time, but now we're living with it.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, also the increase from 2018 to 2019 was, that was from just over 200,000 to just under 600,000 compared to, that increase is pretty extreme.
Yeah, that was sticker shock for sure. And in fairness to Hickok and Boardman, that came with a 30-day notice. So if we'd had a year to do, we might have been able to scramble a little quicker, but they did all they could in their power to keep that, because we didn't have the 4 players that we see now are really it. There's a couple others that are somewhat interested, but they're either not writing it or biomass plants are outside their realm. So any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, I'm scrolling down here.
Yep. Would someone like to make a motion?
There it is.
I can do it. I make a motion to recommend to the City Council that Darren Springer, BED General Manager or his designee, is authorized to renew BED's property B&M insurance for the period of 11/20/21 through 11/20/22 with a not to exceed premium of $676,755 as outlined in this memo, subject to review and approval by the City Attorney's Office.
Second. Lori.
Did I get a second? Did I get a second from Gabrielle?
Well, I gave one too.
Oh.
Yeah, it was from Bob.
Okay, I'll give it to Bob. Commissioner Herendeen?
Aye.
Commissioner Moody?
Aye.
Commissioner Stebbins?
Aye.
Commissioner Whitaker?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. So we are on the second to last agenda item. This is a market update. This is a discussion with James Gibbons, and good to hear since we're all reading interesting things about what's going to go on with energy costs.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen as a full page, slideshow. If that doesn't work, I will flee that option and select an alternate option as quickly as I can. So did that work? No. Did that work?
Yes.
Excellent. So this is a quick, like you say, there's been a lot of discussion in the news about prices for energy this winter. I think with that in mind, it makes sense for us to tell you a little bit about what we're seeing and a little bit about, what that might mean to BED. I want to offer a quick, just a sort of a general definition, if I may, just for those of you who may not be familiar with this. You'll see in a couple of places in this presentation the term Henry Hub, which is a pricing point for natural gas down in the Texas Gulf area. And you'll see Algonquin referenced. And Algonquin is the pipeline that delivers into Massachusetts. Now, Algonquin is the pipeline that most of the generators in New England use to access natural gas as a fuel. So I just offer those. The difference between those two locations can be significant, particularly in the winter when there's a limitation on the pipeline to transmit the gas up to New England. So the difference between those two things is either you can think of it as basis differential or transportation costs to move the gas from the Henry Hub up to New England. And everything worked. There we go. So we're looking at the first time in 12 years that we're entering winter with gas prices above $5 an MMBTU, which is a million BTU. So we've had a very long, and this, by the way, is priced at the Henry Hub. This is not priced in New England. We've had a long time of relatively cheap gas prices, and we are now seeing them tick up for the first time. They're ticking up both at the Henry Hub and even more so delivered to New England. But it's not something that's happened for a while. So that's why I think you're hearing a lot more about it. The highest prices going into winter in 12 years. This is a price of what the cost for peak energy for the month of January 2022 has been trading at since actually late 2020. So we're now up to the point where we're trading for wholesale energy at 16 cents. That's wholesale energy at prices very, very close to our retail rates for residential and commercial customers. Now, Burlington is not going to be exposed to that directly because we have contracts that protect us. But that's the magnitude of the run up and how fast it's accelerated this year. You really can see that since May, you've had just a drastic increase in those prices. The higher gas prices in New England drive the higher electric prices in New England. So Mass Hub on peak is the cost of electric energy, and Algonquin is the cost of natural gas delivered to New England. And you can see how closely correlated they are. They are essentially 90% correlated. The reason is New England relies very heavily on natural gas generation, and ever more so all the time. The prices, as natural gas prices go, so go electric prices in New England. So just sort of that's, when you hear me talking about natural gas, you'll hear me talking about electricity prices. In a lot of ways, they're interchangeable. So don't be surprised if I'm talking about gas and electricity in near proximity to each other. The prices have also risen in the outer years. So right now, the most price effect we've seen, again, this back to the Henry Hub, is for the next year to 2 years. It's pulled up the outer years, but nowhere near as much. So right now, there is an expectation that some of the price increases we're seeing right now will moderate over time. This is the same graph, but I've just added a line showing you when BED would need to be considering its next major energy purchase. So right now, the front end of that curve is not that problematic for us, and the back end of that curve, where we would be needing to start to purchase power again, has not moved nearly as much. So if we find ourselves looking to do a replacement for power, we're not likely to be looking at these prices that we're seeing today unless they continue for the foreseeable, into that period of time. So again, right now, we're not looking to buy power at these prices.
Well done.
So far, so good. So far, so good, as they say, as they fall out of. Now, this is the New England Algonquin prices. So you can see how much difference. I'm going to flip back for a second. Henry Hub is $6 peaking in the winter. New England is peaking at $19 in the winter. The difference is the concerns about transporting gas to New England. if there is an extended cold spell, the first draw on the gas goes to the heating customers. The generators do not sign up for firm gas delivery. The generators typically take spot gas delivery, and so they start having to compete with heating customers or with each other for the last little bit of gas transmission when the weather gets very cold. Again, though, even the New England effect is dampening as you look further forward. And again, this shows you the line at which point, we would be doing our next major energy replacement would be starting in January of 2026. So right now, we're not looking to buy any power in any quantities at these prices. So previously, there have been mitigating factors. We've had some mild winters, which have meant that the prices were lower. There have been a lot of relatively large number of liquid natural gas imports into the Everett terminal in Boston Harbor, which have provided a relief to the transmission pipeline constraints. If you can't bring it up by pipeline, another option is to bring it into New England by liquid natural gas carrier and put it in storage in the Boston area. Then you're not using the pipelines up from the Gulf Coast. And lastly, I'm not sure how much of effect this has had in New England, though New England had one coal plant, the Mount Tom coal plant. Coal used to provide protection against natural gas prices. At a certain point, if natural gas prices got high enough, coal started running more and acted sort of as a cap on how bad the natural gas prices could get. But I'll talk about that in just a bit more detail in a second. So this is a global issue. Prices are high everywhere. They're particularly high in Europe and Asia. Demand has rebounded in large part from COVID, but the supply is not, and New England's supply is constrained by pipelines and LNG imports. The problem with the LNG imports is we're starting to compete in a global market to get that fuel into Everett. So this is the spot forward Asian and European liquid natural gas prices for deliveries to those areas. You can see how much they're willing to pay for an MMBTU. If New England is, I'm going to flip back quickly, flip forward quickly. New England's $19. Are you going to deliver your natural gas to New England at $19? Or are you going to deliver your natural gas to Europe or Asia, at these higher prices? So what we have seen is that generally the LNG receipts at the Everett Mass port have been dropping. As you fall back onto the pipelines, you start seeing more price volatility. So this is the daily natural gas deliveries that are being sent to U.S. export plants. So we're exporting more and more of our natural gas. So that global competition is becoming an increasing problem. There are a couple of pipelines that are considered that may come online that would relieve some of the constraints in New England. They are the MVP, don't ask me what exactly that stands for, and the Regional Energy Access Pipeline. Those would help relieve the current constraints. Right now, the gas demand is in excess of the transmission pipeline for part of the year, and that's causing this problem. But some pipeline relief is possible, but if we keep relying on natural gas generation and we keep electrifying loads, that won't last very long either. This is just a quick note, which is, as prices for natural gas went up, how much did the demand for gas go down? And the answer is, it used to go down pretty sharply. There was a strong correlation. As price went up, you started to have things like coal plants come online and start reducing the demand for gas. We're not seeing that this year. So it may be that some of those historical protections are not there to drive this price down. A couple of potential actions for BED. Fill McNeil with wood for the winter. We are well on the way to doing that. We have planned for an operation essentially around the clock from December to March to maximize our output. You have to keep in mind that BED is generally got excess energy in the winter periods. Not only are we energy long annually, but we are energy long in the winter too. So, however, we are energy long if and only if McNeil is operating, because McNeil is such a large resource for us. If McNeil is not operating, we can go from energy long to energy short immediately. It's just a critical resource for Burlington Electric, is another way of saying that. We are considering the possibility of increasing oil storage at both the GT and McNeil. Problem is that the GT oil storage doesn't last that long. I mean, you know, it's days of runtime, whereas the McNeil storage we're putting up is a winter's worth of runtime. So, you know, we have not taken any specific action on topping off the GT storage, oil storage, though other utilities are considering it. The other option would be to consider selling some of our excess energy and locking in revenues at these high prices, extra energy. And we've been trying to do that, but it's proving difficult because we can only sell if McNeil is operating. Otherwise, we go short. So the long and the summary of all of this is these prices do not represent a problem to BED. At this point in time, as long as McNeil is operating, they actually represent something more like an opportunity. Our excess energy would be valued at these very high prices and would serve as essentially a value stream or a revenue stream that would offset other costs. There are a lot of caveats on that. It depends upon, you know, for example, if during the highest price time of the winter, McNeil happened to be down, you know, that would be a bad sequence of events. But all things being equal, the prices you're hearing about are not posing any problem for BED. If our assets perform as expected or even close to as expected, we will not see an adverse effect from this winter. We'll see a beneficial effect from this winter.
So is one potential exception, I don't know why I have an echo, but a potential exception to that would be if, I mean, we have a problem with the people in Burlington not paying their electric bills, right? So if people have more pressure on their bills, could that potentially be a liability for BED if people are struggling to now not only to pay electric, but if they got to choose between heat, you know, there's some potential bad choices that could have an impact on the balance sheet.
The impact would be primarily natural gas for heating and oil, and I'm not sure where VGS stands on their hedging. Darren, maybe you know, I mean, most of the customers under VGS are not served under a spot price contract, I don't believe. So, you know, VGS, some of them are though. Some are what are called interruptible customers. Those customers may see a very, very big impact, but I don't know that that's the vast majority of the residential customers. I suspect they will see relatively little shock from this, but that is a guess.
Yeah, I was going to agree for the most part with that. I think given that they run under a regulated model, it's not the expectation that those costs would be immediately passed on in their full form to residential or even smaller commercial customers. But certainly if this trend happens and then continues for the longer run, there would be an impact, I think, on you know, heating customers in Burlington.
You would essentially have that vertical line, which is when does the next time VGS need to make a major purchase? And if that line is sooner than our line, for example, you could see that effect at some point. Does that follow? They take the same kind of actions we take, the hedge. They buy contracts ahead of time and things like that. But I don't know if their durations are 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. You know, some of our power contracts are 25 years. Some of them are even a little bit longer than that. So I'm saying I don't know when they next have a major purchase coming up and how that compares to the price of natural gas in New England. And the last thing I'll mention too is, of course, that BGS does not buy from the Algonquin pipeline. BGS buys from the Iroquois pipeline, which comes out of Canada, and none of the data shown here is for the Iroquois pipeline.
Okay, that's helpful.
Other questions?
But again, you know, so the message is, if things behave or perform as we expect them to perform, we should not see a problem from this, and again, may see a benefit.
Interesting times.
Mm-hmm.
We really need coordinated and flexible demand management. Lots of it. Other questions from commissioners?
You're muted, sir.
You're on mute, Commissioner Herendeen. Still on mute. There you go.
Okay, so we're good for several years because we did the right thing and because we're pushing in the direction of renewable energy.
And because we've built into our power supply some buffer in terms of extra energy to protect us against years with low intermittent renewable production and things like that. So a number of different decisions have all, basically combined to putting us in this net energy position that's actually favorable for this winter, as long as the resources produce.
Okay, so looking ahead to 2026, even if they are still burning gas, we would like to do what we did in 26 3 years ago. I guess it doesn't make too much sense to worry about or to speculate on what that would look like in 2026, but I'll ask it anyway. What are the odds that we can do it again?
Well, we can extend contracts, we can renew contracts, we can make new contracts. Even if those contracts are with renewable resources, so what I think my message would be is that, we can start thinking about what we want to do while the impact has not hit the years where we need it. We can start thinking about that today. And I know that Darren is, I think, planning a strategic meeting. This may be one of the topics, but, we could start taking action now and absorb this kind of an increase, or we can wait and see if this kind of increase extends. So, and if this winter comes in mild and the prices collapse, you might see that get drawn down again too. Again, if the winter is a mild winter, and the sellers of energy start seeing these prices not materialize, that tends to pull the markets down pretty quickly too.
Okay, and the reason that somebody that has cheap energy wants to sell it at a higher price is because they can. And I presume that Hydro-Quebec is not immune to the same temptations?
No. And not, so really what you find yourself talking to, when you're talking with a counterparty, especially if you're talking about a contract in the shorter term window, and shorter would be like, 3 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 7 years, where these market energy prices are known, yes, then they're saying, well, I think I'll get this from the wholesale market, even if I don't sell it to you. Where you have a chance to really negotiate maybe different things is if you're doing like a 20-year contract that will get a generating plant constructed, and nobody knows what the market's going to be like in 20 years, and there's a lot of uncertainty. Then you might see something that's based on a cost plus a reasonable rate of return for the developer type of thing. But if you're trading in the window where the wholesale energy markets prices are traded, everyone's going to look to them as part of the negotiation. And that includes HQ.
Yep. Thanks.
Any other questions, or should I stop sharing my screen?
Not from me. I appreciate this update because I had kind of assumed, only because in the past you've said many times that we're we Burlington Electric, because of how we've gone about things, are more responsive to REC price changes compared to New England gas prices. So I'd assumed we were sort of in this way, but it's helpful to see the timeline, that it's sort of it's not just 6 months out, it's a few years.
Right. And if we were what I would describe as perfectly hedged, meaning every hour we had just the right amount of energy from a non-fossil fuel resource, natural gas prices would be kind of irrelevant. To the extent that we have excess sometimes, short sometimes, they're still relevant, but they're not one-to-one relevant. And again, we are hedged, we are well hedged, we are actually a little bit excess, and that was done with reason as well. So
great. Thank you, James.
I would like to add, by the way, you may have noticed the bottom corner of these slides say NextEra Energy. Rather, NextEra had done a presentation on this topic that I was invited to, and rather than make us recreate some of our own slides to show the same things, NextEra very kindly allowed us to use these slides to save time, and I appreciate that them doing that. So again, my folks can do these graphs, but we just seen the exact same graphs, and it seemed really, really silly to just redo them all. So
Thanks for clarifying, because I was like, huh.
and it was done with their approval and much appreciated by me.
Great. Thanks. So last on the agenda is the commissioner's opportunity to provide any last minute comments before our next meeting in a month.
I'm trying. Wait a minute. This actually has to do with a question that I asked last time, and which Chris Burns answered very well. When I read those great reports about what efficiency measures are being made, and I'm still asking myself every time, are we making them more efficient in the burning of gas or in the use of electricity? So I'm proposing that when those little paragraphs are written about who's doing what, that it be as clear as it can be about which kind of energy is involved. The answer is not always clear necessarily, but it would just be helpful to me. Should I explain again what I'm talking about?
I think I understand it.
Yeah, I was going to say Mike Canrick's on the call and can share that feedback with Chris. I think in a number of cases when we're going into a building, it's going to be in tandem with Vermont Gas, and so there's likely going to be an efficiency effort from BED and an efficiency effort from Vermont Gas. That being said, as I think you're all very well familiar with the new renewable heating ordinance, there's going to be a number of buildings that we know are coming that are going to be looking to have a primary heating system that may be electric, and in that case, some of the other improvements to the building relative to weatherization, things that might traditionally be in Vermont Gas's court would be in ours. And so this may be even more relevant going forward than it's been in the past.
Yeah, you can imagine when you're at the cocktail party and somebody says, okay, you're saving energy, what kind?
Mike, you can share that with Chris.
Yeah, and if we wanted to, Commissioner Herendeen, would it be amenable to you to set up a quick call? Because I wouldn't want your request to get lost in translation at all, and it may be helpful. Are you game for that?
Sure. Yes.
Great, thanks.
Any other comments from commissioners? Thank you, Mike. Okay, hearing none. If someone would like to make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Hi.
Bob, Commissioner Herendeen,
Aye.
Commissioner Moody,
Aye.
Commissioner Stebbins,
Aye.
Commissioner Whitaker.
Aye.
Thank you. We adjourn at 7:02.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.